Australian Tim Roberts has won TGB's 14th gold medal at the Olympic Games. In the first round, the 19-year-old beat the Japanese world number one during a dramatic final in the men's boulder and lead climbing events. Our sports correspondent Matt Gregory has been watching. Off the floor, Ed. That's incredible. Wendy Roberts from Surrey has just put in the time of his rock to take gold on the board. After a confident performance in boulder, Roberts entered the knee event in play. Another strong climb followed, and with it, saw the teenager jump to first. In a tense finale, the final competitor fell from the board, just short of the whole and Roberts became Olympic champion and his debut games. And then with the gold to follow, as a really spectacular enters his final event. After a strong showing in this morning's javelin, Britain's Catherine Johnson Thompson currently sits second behind Belgian Jackie Tyan. Johnson Thompson will need to run around 8 seconds faster than her rival in the final event of 800 metres to have a shot at the gold medal. That was our sports correspondent, Matt Gregory.
The scenario was held by Ukrainian MPs of Ukrainian drones attacking the region of Lipetsk, deep in Russian territory. Ukraine said it destroyed dozens of Russian aircraft as well as missiles from glide bombs in a massive drone strike. The Russian Defense Ministry says it managed to destroy 75 drones as they flew in from the Russian border some 300 kilometers away. That material, images and sounds of Su fighter jets released by the Defense Ministry in Moscow as part of Russia's response to Ukraine's cross-border operation in the Kursk region. This morning, Moscow said it was moving troops and munitions to the region. And in the Russian capital itself, there's been reaction to the Ukrainian attack, as our Moscow editor Steve Rosenberg reports.
This is day 4 of Ukraine's surprise cross-border attack on Russia's Kursk region. Looking at how the Russian papers are reporting this today, here's something I find interesting. Keep in mind that most of these newspapers are extremely pro-Kremlin. What's interesting is that there is an acknowledgement in some of these papers that thus far the Ukrainian army has been pretty successful in Kursk region. A military expert tells Izvestia, we need to say it clearly, the enemy is acting skillfully, daringly, by all the rules of the art of war. With drones as an air cover for its tactical groups, then deployed its reserves and battalion tactical groups, which attacked on different sections of Suja, Kolenyov, and Lutsk districts. It also boosted its air defense capabilities, which followed behind. Izvestia admits that it's too early to talk about the situation stabilizing. Moskovsky Komsomolets, in Kursk region, the situation remains difficult. The government paper, Siska Gazette, unfortunately, the enemy succeeded in entrenching itself in an area around several of our villages at the border.
Steve Rosenberg reporting from Moscow. Well, Shoshank Joshi is the defense editor of The Economist magazine, and just before we came on the air, he told me first about the attack in Lipetsk.
What they say is that they were targeting a number of key points on the airbase, including air defense radars. Ammunition was destroyed by the size of the explosion. And this really is part of a very systematic Ukrainian strike campaign that we're seeing across the region. And Ukraine's judgment is essentially that if we can't intercept the glide bombs that are coming our way, we will instead hit the planes on the ground across their supporting infrastructure. And I think this is the latest example of that.
What about the incursion into the Kursk region? How big is that? How many troops are involved? And how much territory have they managed to secure?
Nobody knows those answers with any precision. The Russians said 24 hours ago that they estimated about 1,000 troops were involved. The Ukrainian side, evidence coming out of open sources suggests about 2 to 4 brigades may be involved. But involved can cover up a variety of things. It could be a single unit from a brigade, it could be the entire brigade. My sense is that this is not a couple of thousand people or on the scale that some commentators appear to be suggesting. But it is clearly distinct from the previous incursions into Russia that we've seen. So there is a lot of fog of war going on here, I must say, even among observers who follow this very closely indeed.
So we're now on day 4 of that incursion. How long do you think they can keep it up?
They can keep this up for a good while. I think we could be looking at possibly weeks, but most likely shorter than that, I'd say. And one of the issues is that they've used
there any sign of that happening?
I have not yet seen in the openly available evidence any indication that forces from the Donbass have been pulled off the front, diverted, and sent to Kursk. That may yet happen in its early days, but in theory, yes, it could relieve pressure, but we have to wait to see in practice if that is what actually occurs, or if Russia can staunch the bleeding simply with forces available from inside the country or from other less intense parts of the front.
And is it perhaps worth just saying that Kursk has a historical significance, which makes this particularly embarrassing to the Kremlin?
Well, of course, the Battle of Kursk was an absolutely vital, really prominent battle on the Eastern Front between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in the summer of 1943. So it has enormous prominence. The region is rich with military history. It's associated forever with big armoured defences. But actually, Kursk presents itself as a failure for the Germans. It was a Soviet victory. Also a humiliation for the Russians, but also a cautionary tale for the Ukrainians.
And the question, I suppose, finally, how significant is it that American and European armour is being used in this situation?
It's important because it's the breaking of a taboo. In the past, there was a great deal of neuralgia around the use of Western weapons inside Russia, and now the very positive note, or the relatively unjudgmental note, I would say, that's been struck by the State Department in the last 24 hours, indicates a sort of degree of sanction for this. I don't think the White House is crazy about this, by the way. I think they'll be concerned, but what's clear is they're not condemning it, and in that sense, I think Ukrainians will be very encouraged by the loosening of those restrictions.
We're joined now by Sir Laurie Bristow, British Ambassador to Russia between 2016 and 2020. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can I first ask you about that last point? To what extent do you think there is a danger that what the Ukrainians are doing at the moment, and particularly their use of European and American equipment in the operation, could be seen by Moscow as a provocation, one that might escalate the situation?
Well, of course, Mr. Putin has called it a provocation, and the underlying calculation for Ukraine and its Western backers to date has been about managing the risks of escalation, and particularly the risk of escalation to a direct Russia-NATO conflict. I think what we've seen over the last 2.5 years, though, is that those risks are manageable. It's clearly not in Russia's interest to get into a direct conflict with NATO or the US any more than it is in our interest to get in conflict with Russia. And so I don't expect anything fundamental really on that front to change. Clearly it's a poke for the Russians, but I don't actually see that that leads necessarily into anything more serious between Russia and and NATO.
We heard from Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, giving us a sense of the perhaps surprisingly frank account of what's happened in some of the Russian papers. What, as a former ambassador there, what do you make of that?
Yeah. So I think it's a big embarrassment for Mr. Putin. It's a rather bigger embarrassment for some of his generals. First of all, they didn't see it coming, and second, that the response was ineffective so far. I don't expect, though, this to lead to a serious challenge to Mr. Putin himself. I think his military will have a lot of explaining to do. There have been complaints from Russian citizens, particularly those living in the Kursk region. But those things will mean very little. This is not a country where Mr. Putin is in any sense accountable to the population, and if necessary, they will apply repression. And of course, as we now have seen in the last few years, repression in Russia has effectively gone off the scale, and we need to apply it.
So no real long-term political effect from this in your judgment?
In Russia, no. I think, though, in terms of what the incursion means, there are really two levels to look at this. One is the military significance. We do not yet know entirely clearly what Ukraine's military and political objectives are here. And of course, it's in Ukraine's interest to keep Russia guessing about what Ukraine's trying to achieve. But in terms of the military objective, I think it's, as has already been said, there are a number of things going on here. One is about putting Russian forces under pressure. One may be about countering Russian pressure on Ukrainian forces in the Donbass, where Russia has been making creeping gains, but as usual with Russia, huge losses. In terms of the political environment, though, this is really, I think, the key now going into the rest of the year. So the fundamentally important issue coming up is the US election in November. What Ukraine will be trying to do between now and then is to provide a morale boost to Ukraine's population, to its allies, demonstrating that Ukraine can and will seize the initiative, but also providing continued reasons for Western and particularly US support for Ukraine.
And you think that's really where this is aimed? This is above all a message from Donald Trump and Kamala Harris?
I think it's a very large part of it. So there's a lot of hinting going on that there will be a negotiation of some sort in due course. Of course, Mr. Zelensky hosted his first peace summit in June in Switzerland. There's another one planned for November, coinciding with US elections. Zelensky has said that Russia should attend that. The underlying problem here, though, is that absolutely nobody with any experience of negotiating with Russia has the slightest reason to believe that Russia will negotiate in good faith. So what Zelensky will be seeking to achieve is the best possible circumstances for any negotiation, if and when the time comes for that. But also, all importantly, keeping Ukraine's backers inside, whoever's in the White House.
Sorry, Bristow. Thank you very much indeed.
Hi, Colin, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. The time is 7:03. You're in the Russian Island disorder. You know, I disorder.
Dawn raid by police in Stoke as the arrests of those suspected of involvement in the recent rioting continue apace. Prime Minister, meanwhile, was at Scotland Yard, and Keir Starmer addressed concerns about the way social media posts contributed to the unrest we've seen over the past couple of months.
In relation to online and social media, the first thing I'd say is this is not a law-free zone. And I think that's clear from the prosecutions and sentencing. Today we're due sentencing for online behaviour. That's a reminder to everyone that whether you're directly involved or whether you're remotely involved, you're culpable and you will be put before the courts if you've broken the law. And so that's happening today, that sentencing. I do agree that we're going to have to look more broadly at social media after this disorder, but the focus at the moment has to be on dealing with the disorder and making sure that our communities are safe and secure.
Meanwhile, the courts are working through the cases of those already arrested. In the last half hour, 2 men have been sentenced for a fray after they, in the words of the judge, attacked a group of 4 white males who'd been protesting against immigration in Leeds. The judge began by saying that the law was there to protect everyone.
The law applies to everyone, no matter what colour, race, religion, or political persuasion they are. There is no distinction. The law is there to protect everyone in our society, both in terms of personal safety, businesses, and premises, whether people's homes or commercial properties. It is against that background that both of you involved yourselves in violence in the street in the city centre of Leeds.
Adnan Gaffar, who's 31, was jailed for 18 months for a fray. Samir Ali, who's 21, was jailed for 20 months for a fray. Our home and legal correspondent was there at Leeds Crown Court. Slightly different focus for this morning's activity, Dominic.
No, but that's right, Ed. These, as far as we can tell, these may have been the first counter-protesters to have been jailed so far. And as you heard from the judge there, the law shows no fear nor favour depending on someone's background. And in the case of these 2 men, they didn't actually know each other, but they were part of a large group of Asian men who came out on the counter-protest from various communities across Leeds. Both these gentlemen appear to be of Muslim heritage. They went out there, they were racially abused, they said, by far-right activists, and then a fight broke out. All of this was caught on the city's CCTV, and you see both of these men throwing punches. It doesn't last very long, but as they walk away in a large group, they're kind of taunting the white men who are on the ground and congratulating each other. There's fist bumps going on because they basically got, as they saw it, one over on the far right. And quite simply, for the judge, Guy Curl, KC, who's the senior judge here in Leeds, this was simply unacceptable behaviour, because this was in broad daylight in late afternoon in Leeds, near to a busy bar where people were just having a quiet drink, and all of a sudden there is this brawl going on in front of them. And the judge said this was a group attack during a heightened state of public concern and anxiety about what was going on in the city, and therefore they had contributed to the disorder and had to face the consequences. So there was an awful loss of mitigation actually in this case, particularly in the case of Samir Ali, who has no previous convictions. The court was told that he is a charity worker, does good deeds with the mosque, involved in the food bank, these kind of things, hard-working training with an electrical firm, and really trying hard to say these men had been provoked. You know, you have to show a degree of mercy there, but the judge said everyone's going to be treated the same, and everyone has to take a severe sentence given the public message which has to be sent out.
And what does the rest of the day hold?
We've got another important sentencing this afternoon. This is the first of someone who is accused of stirring up the trouble online. It's a man called Jordan Parler, who's 28, also from Leeds. He's pleaded guilty to publishing written material to stir up racial hatred. He made a series of Facebook posts between the 1st and the 5th of August, so this is after the attack in Southport, and the accusation is that he intended to effectively spark tensions whilst demonstrations were taking place. So he's coming to court this afternoon, and we're going to get the judge's remarks on that as well. So, yeah, there's a lot going on today.
Dominic Cassiani at Leeds Grand Court, thank you very much indeed. And we heard in the news, BBC Board has made a statement about its handling of BBC's handling of the Hugh Edwards case. That statement came through just before we came on air. We're joined now by David Siddleton, a media and arts correspondent. David, they want the money back.
A moral plea. This isn't a legal broach, it's a moral plea, saying effectively they were paying Hugh Edwards for a year. He was off air after he suspended in July of last year, and in November last year they were made aware that there was an arrest, and they were made aware of what sort of allegations were being made about him, about this being category A images of child sexual abuse. The question the BBC was facing was why did they continue to pay him more than £200,000? Remember, he's paid £475,000 from licence fee payers' money, and there was also extra income coming from BBC Studios, the BBC's in-house production arm. Why did they continue to pay him for those months up until the moment he pleaded guilty? So that's what today's statement for Samir Shah is all about, and he, in the statement to staff, he said, let me be clear, the villain of this piece is Hugh Edwards, the victims of those children for whose degradation Hugh Edwards provided a market for. He says the decision by the Director General to carry on paying him for those months, he said, was considered reasonable based on the information they had, which was essentially they were expecting him to be protesting his innocence, and they say it all changed, of course, when the guilty plea came forward, and they said, well, obviously, Mr. Edwards knew what he'd done, but he still took licence fee money to the tune of hundreds of thousands of pounds, and they want him to pay it back. So that's what it is today. A letter, please pay us some money back.
And just briefly to be clear, they have stood by the Director General in the way he's handled.
Absolutely. They say here that based on the information they had at the time, unfortunately hindsight was not available. In the statement here, they consider what he did to be considered unreasonable. And then there's a second element to this, which is the continuing problem of how we handle bad behaviour by those with power in the BBC. A wider workplace review of how those complaints are handled by bad or inappropriate behaviour of those in a position of power.
Many thanks, David. Now, in less than an hour's time, the Assistant Coroner for Devon will record her verdict into the death of Maeve Boothby O'Neill. The 27-year-old had severe ME. At the time she died, she was confined to bed, unable to chew food, and had difficulty drinking because she couldn't sit up. Her case has been on front pages of newspapers, in part because she was the daughter of a senior journalist on the Times, and it's raised serious concerns about the treatment given to those with ME. Earlier I spoke to Karen Hargrave, who has ME herself and looks after her husband James Curry, who has severe symptoms of the disease. She coordinated an open letter to Wes Streeting signed by 2,624 patients and carers calling for the government to commit more research into it.
I was the one that got sick first. So we both had COVID for the first time in March 2020, so right at the very beginning of the pandemic. First time around, James was completely fine, but unfortunately I got sick and had lingering symptoms afterwards. And for around 2.5 years, really, I was very, very unwell. I was housebound for a lot of that time, and I had this, I guess, quite rapid recovery about 2 years ago. I'm still not really sure why. So there's pretty much just as I was improving, we had that second round of COVID, and James, having been completely fine the first time, he was very badly affected. And previously he'd been fit and healthy. He ran a marathon. And for the time that I was sick, he was actually my carer. So he deteriorated very rapidly, and he's now been diagnosed as a result of long COVID with very severe ME. At this point, he's completely bedbound almost. He can just get out of bed basically once a day to go to the bathroom. He has very, very extreme cognitive issues to the point that he's not really able to process it when people talk to him or to sort of formulate, verbal responses. So we haven't been able to have a conversation in well over a year now. And he has these difficulties that a lot of the most severe cases have with sort of chewing, with swallowing, which mean that we have to be very, very careful to make sure that he's getting the right nutrition and hydration at home. Because
sorry to pick you up, but I was just very struck by what you said about not being able to talk to each other, because you haven't been married very long, have you? That must be incredibly difficult.
I mean, we've been together for 10 years, but we got married 5 years ago. We just had our 5-year wedding anniversary, and we've never been able to actually properly celebrate any of our wedding anniversaries, because our first one was in June 2020 when I was unwell. So it's been completely devastating for us, and I guess just nothing can really prepare you for becoming a full-time carer for your husband at the age of 32. It's just it's an incredible toll that it's taken on both of us.
You said that you had the condition recovered incredibly quickly, rather to your surprise, I think. What is his likely trajectory? What's going to happen to him?
Well, I think the difficult thing is that we just don't know. Because research into ME, it's been very, very much underfunded for a very long time, so we really don't know. We don't have very sort of proven treatment. It's very difficult to get concrete guidance, but we really just don't know. It's possible that we could be this way for the foreseeable future, which is of course terrifying for both of us.
You said that you have to make sure he gets enough nutrition.
Yeah.
Can he eat at the moment and drink?
So he can only have liquid food. So he's basically reliant on, you get these liquid nutrition milkshake drinks, which I feel terrible for him, but that's all he can manage. And basically through those, he's able to get enough kind of nutrition. We've had tests and we know that he's not, as things stand, kind of malnourished. For someone who loves food so much, it's just a very, very bleak existence for him.
And how would you characterise the way you've been dealt with by healthcare professionals?
So I've co-founded a campaign called Barefoot ME with another carer for a partner who's also very, very severely ill with ME. I've spoken about this before. It's a very strange kind of grief, because there's this loss of, I guess, of the life that we had together before, and all of our kind of hopes and plans for the future. So there's a grief, and there's also just a pain, really, in watching someone that you love, personally I love most in the world, suffer in the way that he's suffering, and not being able to, because he's very hypersensitive to touch. He can't have a conversation, not being able to give him a hug or sit with him and tell him it's going to be okay. It's just an incredible pain that we've gone through. And I think on top of that, you're also having to have very, very difficult and stressful experiences trying to get healthcare. So you're sort of constantly, there's so many misperceptions about ME, which is sort of very, very prevalent within the NHS. There's some clinicians who are great and empathetic and understanding, but there are some who can be very dismissive, who have the view that this is psychosomatic, there's not a real disease. So on top of dealing with this really incredibly devastating disease, you're also constantly having to fight, to be listened to be believed that what you're going through is real, and having to fight for appropriate care, and I think, you know, that's why we started this campaign, because I think, to me, the stress that's added by healthcare, I think in itself is something that could be avoided.
Karen Hargrave talking to me earlier. We're joined now by Dr. Claire Taylor, a GP who looks after some of the country's most severely affected ME patients. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could we firstly talk about diagnosis? Is that idea that we heard Karen Hargrave talk about there, that it's not really a physical disease at all, is that idea now banished in healthcare circles, or do some people still believe it?
I think that's a really good question. The diagnosis of ME is essentially ruling out other conditions, and then you are left with the signs and symptoms of ME. They are different from the signs and symptoms of mental health conditions, but I think there's still a lack of education really coming through medical schools and then into further training on just how sick people can be with ME at home. They're often young, very previously fit and active before, and I just think there is a huge disbelief that a condition could be this severe. So I think when faced with a very severe ME patient for the first time, I think it's very difficult for healthcare professionals to understand how a condition can do this to someone.
That's really interesting. Now, you say it's not really diagnosed itself. You simply rule out everything else, and then you come to the conclusion that ME must be what it is, which suggests you're still not quite sure about how to identify it.
Well, the hallmark is something called post-exertional malaise, which is where activity, which can be very minor activity, even for some people, as we've heard sitting up, can actually cause a relapse of the condition. So that's the hallmark. So if you've got that, if you've got that happening and identify it, you can have a decent idea you're dealing with ME. And fatigue is the other main symptom. But then there's tens or hundreds of other symptoms go alongside it. So I think we are pretty sure when we've ruled other things out, but we just have to be careful that we don't miss something else. Especially with the prevalence increasing with COVID, we now have a lot more people with long COVID than ME.
And what about the question of children? We heard Karen Hargrave talk about the difficulty of her husband getting nutrition, and I know that's something that's come up in the case of Maeve Goodby O'Neill, and we'll find out the result of the coroner's verdict in due course. But what principles do you think healthcare professionals should adopt when it comes to dealing with somebody who finds it so difficult to swallow?
So we have updated NICE guidance, so it's national guidance on very severe ME around feeding. However, I've got a number of patients like this, that things tend to break down when they have to go to hospital with malnutrition. And it's at that point that sometimes people are should have an eating disorder, and there's little understanding of the autonomic changes that cause their food to sit in their stomach, that they can't digest food, that their muscles are too weak to swallow, and that's when you get these public campaigns where people are in hospitals and they're not making any progress with being able to get nutrition. And I think we need a task force actually to deal with this and make sure that any patient being admitted or in the community with swallowing and nutrition issues is managed as a patient with ME and not a mental health disorder.
What does that mean? Forgive me.
So sometimes they need tube feeding. And I think, again, there's a bit of disbelief. How can this condition that's been downplayed for so many years have people needing to be tube fed? But the reality is that is the experience, and I think it needs a special task force to deal with these very severe patients, as some doctors might, and not just doctors, but anyone on a ward, anyone involved in care might only see one of these cases in their whole career. Whereas obviously I've got a number of them that I look after, but they might, in facing this, think, how can this happen?
Claire Taylor, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Now, we may have some genuine August heat on the way, but farmers are still struggling to come to terms with the impact of the many gallons of rain that was dumped on their fields over the winter and spring. Wheat yields are down by 15%, and on some farms it seems they've simply given up the battle to secure a good harvest. The amount of arable land that's been left fallow is up by nearly 80%. Henry Ward gained a certain celebrity when the floods in his Lincolnshire fields cut off his home almost completely. I spoke to him then and again this morning and started by asking how he was.
I'm alright, thank you. Stood in a field just near Lincoln currently, having a look at some wheat.
Well, last time we spoke, I don't think you could have stood in the field because
Yeah, no.
surrounded by floods and your house was cut off. How's it developed since then?
So that farm, I'm on a different farm at the moment, but that farm is dry now. The riverbank, it's had a temporary repair done to it, which doesn't fill me with confidence. But that farm is now planted with wildflowers, what we call winter bird food. It's got into a scheme the government are paying us to basically create habitat and feed the birds over winter, which at least, yes, I'm getting paid something for that, but that block of land is now just too risky for me to be planting with food, which is very frustrating.
So you're being paid to feed the birds, not to feed us.
Exactly. And there's a lot of that going on, and we're doing this across the rest of our farm. We'll have sort of 10% of our land area into environmental schemes like that, but there are people taking big blocks of land out and putting them into these schemes rather than producing food, and that's obviously having an implication on our national food security, which concerns me, to be honest.
But before we talk more about that, can I just catch up on one personal issue? Because I recall that when we last spoke, your wife was expecting a child.
The girl, great, the girl from Pittsburgh. She's about 3.5 months old now, and yeah, Anne and my wife we're doing great. We're actually getting to sleep as well, which is a bonus.
Okay, well, returning to the finances of your farm, presumably payments for the wildflower meadows help, but don't really restore you to the sort of financial position you'd like to be in at this stage.
No, exactly that. It'll only be half what I could get producing food, roughly. But there's a bigger issue with that farm that floods, with the house and yard getting completely cut off. I've got a house and a farmyard there, a valuable asset, which is now, pretty worthless, and I can't use it. So, for example, we take the sheep down there normally in the winter to lamb them. We had to evacuate them last year when we flooded. We're just about to put the rams in with the ewes in a month's time, and thinking forward to them when we start lambing. Do I dare take those sheep down there to lamb again? I don't think we do. We've only had a temporary repair on the riverbank. Now, that's in the Environment Agency's words. It's got a lifespan of 3 years. I just think it's ludicrous.
You mentioned the impact of all this on food security. Looking ahead to next year, are you drawing back on your plans because of all the uncertainties there have been this year?
Yeah, so that farm's the case in point. So we just daren't grow food there. So I've got 200 acres there, but I dare not grow food. And elsewhere, where we don't flood, poorer land that doesn't produce a lot of food or big crops, we're putting into environmental schemes. I think that's good. I think that's where these environmental schemes that the government paid for are brilliant, because those areas want setting aside. But that farm that floods, that is my best, most productive land I have anywhere, but it's too risky to farm now. But I am open to discussion. I am quite a positive person. Let's do something for the common good, work together, but we've actually got to work together and not just talk about it. We've got to actually do something now, because we do live in climate change. We will see a lot of rainfall, intense rainfall again, and if we're not careful, it'll be like Groundhog Day and it'll be flooded again.
And you say many other farmers are in a similar position?
Yeah, they are. And this last 12 months has been the most challenging season I've ever known. I'm not particularly old, I'm 33, but my grandfather, he stood in the field at the side of me. He's in his 80s, and it's been probably the most challenging he's ever known. And farmers up and down the country have had a horrid time. Yields are down this year. Definitely, we're not going to be producing as much food in this country this year as we normally would. So yeah, it's not been a great season, but we start fresh, and hopefully we get the kind of season going.
Eisteddfod of Wales, stretching back to 1176. Current Chief Executive is our guide.
crime that he's now pleaded guilty to, but also the scandal that hung over him, that was exposed by the Sun newspaper, his requesting photographs and God knows what kind of nature from a young fellow and all this kind of stuff.
It encompasses the traditional and the modern. It's an eclectic mix of all different art forms, and of course competitions are at the heart of the festival.
We have other rapidly crucial, very serious programs. So you could say that he had broken his own contract. He was in breach of his contract because of his behaviour, and it now turns out that he most definitely was. And that a conversation could have been had about that, and then licence fee payers could have been saved 200,000 quid.
Well, I don't know what the BBC do, but certainly, it would be gross misconduct. But you still have to prove gross misconduct. So the BBC supposedly investigated it. We don't know what they found, but if they had found that he was guilty of gross misconduct, then they should have dismissed it quite legally.
Well, quite. And I'll tell you what
I don't know what the BBC do, but certainly from a contract point of view, while there's an investigation, you can't sack them. And as for when people have been off sick, I think the other chap said, your contract will have you can have 12 months or sick, 2 weeks, whatever. That's part of contract law. So BBC, I think they've been silly, but they haven't actually really done anything wrong, other than now trying to make it look better. Well, they can't.
We're trying to make it now look like it was his fault. In a letter to staff, the BBC chair, Samir Shah, said that Edwards had behaved in bad faith, saying that the corporation believed he had taken his salary despite knowing he was to plead guilty to the offences. So they're saying it was his fault, not their fault.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I still say they haven't done anything wrong. Yes, it comes back down to Hugh. If he's taken his salary, but always realised that he was guilty, that he was going to plead guilty, then yeah, he has taken in bad faith. There's no question of that. But I still don't think the BBC have actually done anything wrong.
I don't know if they have any means of compelling him to give it back, do they, though?
Well, they'd have to take his call. They'd have to take his
Imagine how that would look if they had to pay. I mean, that's what I mean is it ought not to have been beyond the wit and wisdom of the Director General, the lawyers, his family, his doctors, or whoever it is, to cook up something which meant that they could put it in abeyance and pay him should he have turned out not to be guilty or turned out not to plead guilty or something of that kind. But just handing over £200,000 worth of other people's money, because that's what it is. It's not their salaries. They haven't had to earn it. It comes from you and me and everybody else who either watches or in many cases doesn't watch the BBC. And to hand it over and then ask for it back just seems kind of utterly feeble and completely the wrong way around. After all, these are relationships with actual people. The law is one thing. The threat of a hideous court case about the possession of child abuse pornography is another thing, and a reputation of somebody who's such a treasure to the organisation is another thing, and none of them go well together. Appreciate the call. Thank you so much. I'm Vanessa Phelps. This is LBC, and the time 1:45.
This is LBC. Tonight's Euro Millions jackpot is £43 million. Oh, that calls for a dance. Do you know of the robot? I'm a little rusty. Oh, you've still got it? Never lost it. You're a machine. Get that Euro Millions feeling tonight. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Play on air. Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
Next up, which markets might be affected by the election results?
Hi, this is Peter, an investor on eToro. I feel that housing and energy stocks could benefit.
Interesting, Peter. Let's hear another opinion.
Alice here, also an eToro. I think results are so predictable that...
We had about a week in a hotel. I was being questioned by the defendants.
When a biopsy found both asbestos fibres and talc particles in her cancer tissue, a pathologist concluded her exposure to asbestos was from her use of talc-based cosmetics. Anna decided to sue the 3 companies that made her favourite face powder and talcum powder. She can't tell me their names, but I've checked the court documents and found it was Estee Lauder, Clinique and Avon. She claims their products contained asbestos, which has caused her cancer.
I'm not going to lie, there were some questions and you do cry. And it's really emotional. when I was asked about the impact it's had on my life. We sort of lead a kind of half-life now because you're never sure what's going to happen next. So it has spread, but there's really nothing at the moment that they can give me that is going to really make much of a difference.
After being questioned over a long and grueling week, Hannah eventually got the news that her case would be heard in America. As the companies were based in the USA, and due to the fact that most of the UK laws are geared towards workplace asbestos exposure, Hannah chose to go through the court system there. The judge set a date for trial, and then, days before they were meant to appear in court, the companies called them.
I can't really talk about the details because I have confidentiality agreements, but we did get some justice. I think that's probably all I can say.
When I put Hannah's claims to Estee Lauder, who also owns Clinique, it said,
"The Estee Lauder company is committed to selling safe products. We only use talc that is tested and certified as asbestos-free. Additionally, all our ingredients undergo a comprehensive safety review and evaluation, and our products are safe for their intended use."
I put this to Avon and it said,
"Any talc used by Avon is the highest quality cosmetic grade and has been tested to confirm that it does not contain asbestos. Any product that carries the Avon name has undergone a rigorous and thorough safety evaluation."
Since this case, more Brits are following in Hannah's footsteps. Her lawyer, Harminder Baines at Lee Day, now has dozens of similar cases she's working on. There is one court case we can talk about though, one that didn't settle out of court. It started in 2018. From BBC Radio 4, this is How They Made Us Doubt Everything. Series 2, Talc Tales. I'm Phoebe Keane, and I've been investigating the tactics industries can use to delay regulation and cast doubt over science. Episode 5, Talc on Trial. In 2018, Gail, Lucille Ingham and 21 other women sued Johnson & Johnson. They all regularly used talcum powder around their genitals, and they all had ovarian cancer. Their lawyers claimed the talcum powder was contaminated with asbestos, and that had made them sick. Some of the key evidence used in that case has been read to you over the course of this series. It's how I've been able to peek behind boardroom doors and read their internal emails. The jury found Johnson & Johnson's talc products did contain asbestos, and that the company had failed to adequately warn of the risks of harm from the asbestos. They found this failure caused or directly contributed to the deaths or the cancer affecting the 22 women. The jury ordered the company to pay just over $4 billion in punitive damages. This case made it all the way up to the Court of Appeals, and the verdict was upheld, although the damages were reduced to $2 billion, or £1.5 billion. It's still one of the biggest pharmaceutical payouts of all time. Thousands more claims against Johnson & Johnson have been launched, and it recently